So, welcome back, everyone. We have Chris Gallagher with us for a second episode. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me again.
I'm glad to have Chris once again. It's been a very popular episode. And on this one, we're going to focus on cleaners, soaps. We have a lot of questions. I have also other questions from you guys, from ceramic coatings to all that good stuff. And just by the way, today we're in my bedroom. I have some renovation still going. So, just letting you know right off the bat. So, Chris, my first question is something I overheard the other week. I overheard someone speaking with authority. He mentioned that all detailing chemists talk to each other regularly. Is there any truth to this? I'm just curious.
I mean, I guess I'm not part of that clique or that club apparently because I'm not used to talking to a whole lot of other detailing chemists. I will say I have talked with other detailing chemists at other businesses, and we have a very collegiate relationship, and there's no ill will with anyone. We're usually very commiserate with the same frustrations and challenges at our various businesses and stuff. We're asked to do the same sort of wizardry and support marketing claims and all that sort of stuff. So usually it's a lot of laughing and not a lot of like angst. But um, I've certainly helped other chemists too, and there's no desire for us not to work together. Chemists as a breed are very collaborative.
Yeah, so it would not be maybe right or not welcome to talk with maybe competitor all the time as well. So that's kind
You
of
just
a
yeah,
weird comment.
obviously you got to be careful of what you say, but realistically too, it's we're all chemists doing our jobs and we're all trying to make a living, and I haven't met any chemists that were very standoffish or not willing to talk.
Okay. So let's get into the soaps. Last time you mentioned that you've seen over 1,200 different SKUs when it comes to maybe car soap. Are there really that many different soaps?
Um, I think maybe either I misspoke or there is a misunderstanding, but B&B has 1,200 formulas, so that means like across all the different product categories. But we definitely
Mhm.
have at least 100 or a couple hundred soap formulations, and part of that's the differentiation and the variations. But realistically, when you're formulating a soap, you have, I would say, a few different kind of structures, maybe three or four. You have, SLS or SLES based soaps. So that's sodium lauryl sulfate or lauryl ether sulfate or sodium lauryl sulfate. You have others that are like DDBSA based, which is the dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid or sulfonate salt. And then you have other ones that are using like glucosides and things, or alpha olefin sulfonate, which is AOS. And they're all going to give you different properties. So things like DDBSA are going to be really good cleaners. Really wet foam tend to be a little bit more expensive, and you have to pH neutralize them because it comes from an acid. You neutralize it with a caustic, and you get the salt. So your pH is going to be about 8. So people sometimes see that 8 pH and they freak out and go, it's not pH neutral. I'm like, it's neutralized. Um, and then you have other soaps that are like the glucosides, which are sugar derived or natural based soaps. So those will be things that foam really well and things like that, but they tend to be a lot more gentle, and that's why you reach for them. And then I would say the lion's share of soaps are going to be that SLS or SLES, and those are going to be more of a drier foam, but it's a very high foaming effective soap. SLS cleans better than SLES, but SLES is going to lubricate better than SLS and things like that. So, and then you can mix and match, right? So you're going to have what I would call primary and secondary surfactants. The ones I just described are primaries. Then you're going to have secondary ingredients that help with foam production, bubble stability, cleaning, lubrication. And then you get into the additives, right? So then you have like carnauba emulsions that you can add for having an and wax kind of feel, or in the modern era, you can add silicone emulsions or silicate emulsions to get that SiO2 and get that film forming to give you some water beading and water sheeting afterward. Or you could add things like quaternary ammonium compounds that are going to allow you to get a beading sheeting type effect when you go to wash them off.
At the base level that you mentioned at the beginning, Is there a better one, or it's just a different way to get to the end result?
I think it's a lot preference based, right? So I've seen the market really attach itself to all kinds of different formulations. At Adams, for example, I think they have like 5 soaps. And I did a video with Joe years ago talking about, why do you have 5 soaps? Aren't they all just soap? And we talked about all the differences of each soap and why each one exists and what's the purpose. Um, I think sometimes it just comes down to, what are you trying to accomplish? I know some people really put a lot of attention on lubrication of soap because they're not wanting to scratch. Some people want a decontaminating soap, so they're going to have ingredients in there to either raise the pH or lower the pH, or chelates and things that are going to help scavenge metal ions or help dissolve salts or help penetrate films or help remove residues or oils or sort of like lipids and things that are on the surface from the roads. So, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there's a lot of kind of ways to skin the cat, so to speak. So, sometimes soaps, are very simplistic and it's just like SLS and water or SLES and water or DDBSA and water, with maybe a foam boosting additive added in there. Other soaps might be, 10 plus different types of surfactants long, and then they're very complicated and they give a very unique kind of feel to the vehicle. And so maybe that's, why some soaps are, $4 a gallon and other ones are $30 a gallon. Because some of these raws that can go into these soaps are very specialized. So they can be flash foamers. So they foam really aggressively and then the foam disappears fairly quickly so that you have more free rinsing. They have other things that are going to create a lot of foam when aerated for things like the foam cannons. So like for that, I'm talking like Adams Mega Foam. It has a special
Mhm.
ingredient in it that makes it foam extremely aggressively when air gets pushed through it. Um, and then you have soaps that are going to have all kinds of different additives in it. And some of these additives are, $25, $30 a pound. So when you start building those into soaps, the soap formula cost for the manufacturer can jump up many multiples, right? So instead
Mhm.
of us producing it for $2 or $3 a gallon, it might be a $15 per gallon soap to manufacture. And then people are like, $60 a gallon soap, this is insane. And I'm like, it's just what's required to get there. And that's not to speak of concentration, right? So of course, some soaps have a lot of chemistry in it where it's, maybe 30-40% water, and other soaps where it's 80-90% water. So that's where you get into the 1500 to 1 dilution versus a 1 to 128 or 1 to 256. So that means an ounce of soap for a gallon of water versus an ounce of soap for 5 gallons of water. Um, Different concentrations are going to let you get away with different dilution levels. And I would say, something like a 1 to 1500 dilution, I think that's a little extreme. Um, a soap at that level of dilution, you're talking almost a tunnel wash, where you're driving your
Yeah.
car through an automatic tunnel. They're sometimes only putting on there, 10 or 15 milliliters of soap per car. So it's getting diluted out that like 1,500 times. Whereas if you're going to do that in the detailing space, you're going to have a cap full per a bucket full of water. And realistically, you're probably not going to get very much foaming from that, but it's more of a value play. So
Do you think they do that to like pique your attention or make the product attractive for the value proposition?
yeah, exactly. I think some soaps aren't afraid to charge a lot because they provide a lot in terms of quality, right? Like the foam is very shaving cream thick, plops off the car, lasts on the car a long time, sticks to the paint. Like all the different ingredients in there are tailored to the detailing process and making it really a nice experience and a really effective experience. And then other people, it's like they just don't want to spend that much for some soap. So you're going to get those manufacturing sub $1 a gallon for soap. So of course it's going to be a $5 gallon of soap, and you can dilute it 1,500 fold. I'm like, sure, you can technically do that with basically any soap, but your experience is going to be not as great. You're going to be able to
Mm.
tell a difference. So
Yeah.
it's appealing to value versus appealing to quality or whatever, cost
Okay.
conscious versus performance conscious.
I have one that is 1 to 1500, and I didn't like it at that level. I had to add more. I think I ended up using it at 1 to 500 or 1 to 800.
Yeah.
You could feel it with your hands, and even with the wash, it was not what I was expecting in terms of slickness of the soap.
Right. It's very hard to pack enough chemistry into a bottle to get to that level of dilution and have a really high level experience. There's just not enough space.
So, so you touch on many things there. I want to go back to them, and so I guess making soaps is always like a compromise. It's a give and take, I guess.
To some extent, yeah. There's no such thing as, I would say, as the best soap, because there's so much difference in how people perceive a soap. Again, some people want it really thick. um, Me personally, when I'm using a soap, I don't want massively thick foam, because then when you go to spray it off the car, it can be kind of tedious to get all of the foam off. Other people want to just see their car just like completely covered in foam. um, Other people, it's all about the slickness, and it's paramount how well it cleans. They're like, it's a soap, it needs to be the best soap it can be. Other people, they want a jack of all trades, a 2-in-1 or a 3-in-1, where you're washing and putting a sealant all at once. And there's trade backs with that, like you said. If you start building in silicone technologies or various sorts of polymers, you're going to harm the cleaning. I don't really care what anyone says. You can't build silicones and sort of sticky resins and stuff into these types of soaps and then not impact your ability to clean stuff off the surface, because you're going to encapsulate a lot of that dirt with things like the silicones. You're going to inhibit the ability of the surfactants to marry up with the dirt and carry it off the car. Um, so as you said, it's a balance. It's definitely a Goldilocks thing as you're formulating, of like, too much is too much and too little you don't see an effect. Um, I've never personally pushed a lot of soaps that were very 2-in-1s or 3-in-1s, simply because I think there's easier ways to put protection on a vehicle, or there's already too many ways to put protection on a vehicle. So why inhibit something like a soap, which has a very important job in the process? But again, to each their own. But I think a lot of people can tell when they're using a sealant soap that it doesn't clean as well as a pure soap.
I never bought into it, and recently I had a few. The distributor sent me a few 2-in-1 soaps, and I looked at the description and the how to use the product, and they said to pre clean the vehicle before using it. So that right away, they tell you to pre clean the car. So that's a giveaway in terms of cleaning ability. Is not going to be that great.
Well, right. And it's, sometimes they're very expensive because you have to apply the soap directly to the mitt periodically throughout the wash. So you're going to consume a lot of soap. But everything has its place, right? Like, where I would say those are most useful are for people that are short on time, or they're
Mm.
kind of agnostic, or not super plugged into making sure their car's spotless before they apply protection. They're looking for something that's a jack of all trades and is going to get the job done quickly. Um, but they've never been my personal favorite thing to work on or develop. I just don't think
Mm.
sealants belong in soaps personally.
Okay. So when someone says soap is soap, in reality, it's not true. Soap is not always the same thing.
Nope. And that's true in all of car care. There's no such thing as an interior detailer is an interior detailer, and a sealant's a sealant. And there's plenty of differentiation out there for all kinds of different products. That's why, when people are brand agnostic and they're liking different brands for different products, I'm like, that makes total sense, because they're going to like how one company approached a certain part of the process with a certain product versus another. I don't know that there's any one brand out there that's got it all figured out where they have the best in every category, right?
No, but they are hard to. So for the as far as the user is concerned, for me, I've been testing. I have a ton of soaps, and tested them side by side. They they are really hard to differentiate. Just like a rinseless wash, right? It's the color, the scent, the slickness is pretty similar. The cleaning power. Sometimes you'll feel the suds are different. The foaming is feels different a little bit, but they're pretty hard to be differentiate overall.
Yeah, I mean, and often as a white label manufacturer, that is often a very difficult way to differentiate a brand is through something like soap, because soap is kind of such a low barrier to entry in terms of the formulary work. Like it is somewhat difficult to differentiate one soap from another, other than things like concentration, um, or price point and availability, right? So sometimes it's just like people are like, I'm just going to buy whatever's cheapest and most available. I go into the store all the time and this is the stuff that's available. So I don't really care what else is available. And it makes total sense to me because at the end of the day, a soap should be a soap and there's not going to be a huge difference.
So so when you compare a gallon of soap, 30 bucks a gallon, and another one is 90 bucks, how can I know I'm not paying for their marketing campaign, or I'm paying for a high quality ingredients or surfactant or everything that you mentioned before?
A lot of it, as you've probably done in videos, is a foam cannon's going to give it away pretty well, right? If you do the same 2 ounces in a 32-ounce foam cannon, the type of soap coming out, how thick it is, whether it clings to the car, how long the foam sticks around, that's going to be very telling. Same thing with a bucket, right? The head of foam on a bucket, what you'll see with cheaper soaps is when you hit it with the pressure washer, you'll get a lot of suds and you're like, see, it's a good soap, it's just fine. But you'll plunk your wash mitt in it once or twice and put the mitt on the car, and when you look back at your bucket, you'll see that almost all the foam is gone. Whereas with some other soaps, you'll do the entire vehicle and you'll still have a nice huge head of foam on your bucket by the end with a higher quality soap. Just like with a foam cannon, you're going to get a much thicker film of soap and foam on the car. You're going to get higher lubrication. You're going to get that foam sticking around for longer, which gives you more time to work it on the vehicle. Or if you're in a sunny situation, you're probably not going to get a residue that sticks on the car. Or if you do get a residue, you can just hit it with water and it'll all rinse free very well. And you're not going to get a lot of spotting. When you get into cheaper soaps, you're going to see a lot of that, like quality of life and ease of use drop a lot. So it's a trade off.
My product recommendation for this week is Armor Detail Supply Phobic. You get 90 ml of ceramic coating. This is a great 1 year ceramic coating, super easy to use, super slick, but I like to use this product to top up existing ceramic coating. So more on that on the houseofrags.com and .ca. You can use the coupon code Dogma to save 10%. And let's get back into the video. Okay. And we see the old school soaps, they're pretty much all 1 ounce to 128.
Yeah, I usually by default say 1 to 128 or 1 to 256. So that's 1 ounce per 1 gallon of water or 1 ounce per 2 gallons of water.
So in the lab for you, is it difficult to change it, for example, from 1 to 128 to 1 to 500? Can you do
No,
that easily? No?
that's literally a function of the concentration. So
Okay.
um, if a customer wants a soap at a specific cost point, and they want a specific dilution, usually that's what we'll try and do is produce a soap at that cost point and then dilute it at that concentration and see what the quality of it's like. And if they want to have a higher dilution rate, it's going to require more chemistry, which increases costs, which increases price, right? So, but it's the level of dilution required. I guess to some extent it depends on the surfactants because a lot of surfactants aren't 100%, right? Something like an alpha olefin sulfonate, you'll see it as a raw material as AOS 40. That means it's alpha olefin sulfonate 40% actives, which means 60% of it's water. So pound for pound in a blend, you're putting in, 60% of that pound for pound is water. So whereas with another soap, you might be, or another surfactant, you might be using like SLES, which is 70% active. So pound for pound, 70% of that is active ingredient. So on a pound for pound basis, each pound you put into the soap of one versus the other, you're going to get a higher performance out of the SLES because it's more active. There are some soaps and surfactants that are anhydrous, meaning they're powder. So that means they're 100% active. So you can buy DDBSA or SLS or SLES as powders and add it to blends, and those are 100% active. So sometimes you can build more activity into a soap because you're using a higher active surfactant.
Okay.
So it depends, right? Like I'm getting a little technical, but sometimes people say this is 60% surfactants. I'm like, well, if it's 60% surfactants that are 40% actives, you're actually only going to have like a 20 or 30% active soap. But if you say it's 60% active of a 70% active surfactant, then you're actually much higher concentration.
Mhm.
So again, comes down to the marketing where someone says, hey, our soap is only 40% water. I'm like, well, 40% water that we add to the tank, and then the rest of it's raws. But if most of those raws are also water, you're not technically adding that much chemistry.
Could you get like any of your soap in a powder form and just ship it to me the container as a powder form for us at home? We could just use a scoop in a bucket and go ahead with that.
Yes, 100%. So you can see like car soap follows a lot like laundry detergent, right? So you have liquid laundry detergent, you have powder laundry detergent, and now you have Tide Pods and things. Car soap's every bit the same, right? Each of them has a benefit and a trade off. Technically, powder is the cheapest and most effective. It's cheapest because you're not transporting water and you're not going to need to use as much powder. And it's 100% active. But yes, you can, like car washes, for instance, they might buy a drum of powdered soap and they basically add 2 heaping scoops to a drum, add water and mix until it turns into a solution, and then their machines suck off that drum. And then when the drum empties, they fill back up with water, add 2 more scoops of powder. And it's a much more cost effective way of delivering a soap. Um, I think it hasn't really caught on in the car care space, partly because of things like foam cannons and stuff. If you throw powder into a foam cannon reservoir and add water, but you're not super diligent about making sure you dissolve the powder before you start sucking it up into the aperture and things like that of the foam cannon, you can definitely jam up the foam cannon and potentially break it, right? So
Hmm.
no one wants to have like a $60 or $80 foam cannon get destroyed because they didn't wait 2 more minutes for their soap to dissolve. So uh, I think liquid soaps, just like they are in laundry detergent, are very satisfying because it's kind of a grip it and rip it where you can add it to the solution, shake it once or twice, or agitate it and then start using it. Powder takes a little bit longer, but it's more cost effective. And I would say pods are some of the most controversial because they're the most, I guess, quote unquote, convenient, but the least effective and the least cost effective because you're only delivering, 6 milliliters of soap per pod, sort of. And then you have
Okay.
the PVA film that makes up the pod that's going to potentially leave streaking and things all over your car. So frequently, what I see is mostly liquid soap wins just because it's a good balance between cost effective and convenient.
Okay. So we could really have that because I'm wondering there's brands that ships like gallons from across the world to the US or the North America to for us to buy it. And
Right.
they did you hear like distributor always complaining about shipping cost and I have to charge you shipping. Do you know the price of shipping of today? So I'm just wondering. I've seen a brand Chemex recently. They came out with a like their pre-washes or there's 2 products that comes out as a powder. I thought that was really innovative and I wouldn't mind uh, making the dilution myself, but I understand there has to be a market and people there and nowadays they're lazy, just want to use what they know and it has to be easy and convenient. But
Absolutely.
it is it's very good to get your thoughts on that because that just confirms that we could have powdered soap and really make it simple for the enthusiasts.
Yep. You technically could.
Okay, let's move to before we move to the interior cleaners. Is there any truth to the fact the other day overheard again another thing that some of my viewers mentioned that rinseless wash is basically cleaning your car with almost just water and it damage paint in some way if you don't really rinse it compared to
No,
just drying it.
I think it's a legitimate process, and I think it's a legitimate product. It's every bit, with the formulations what it's marketed as. We've got things built in there for lubrication. We've got things built in there for emulsification, basically encapsulating dirt with surfactants and then using lubrication to let you wipe them away safely and cleanly. There's usually a little bit of chelation, for scavenging certain things that the surfactants can't do. And then there's, of course, sometimes a little bit of some surfactants for additional cleaning that can create some foaming. So that when you're using it through like an IK spray or something, some formulations will foam and some are very non-foamy. Just another preference thing. But I think it's a legitimate process. I think where it goes wrong is either using too little or not using the right high quality towel. I think the towel is a pretty key aspect to doing a rinseless wash method. And I think wiping things in a uniform direction and making sure you flip your towel a lot is super important. I think at least I'm this way. When I'm rinseless washing my car, there's a tendency to get lazy partway through it. And you're just like, I'm just going to start kind of toweling it down and not adhering to the process so diligently because you get tired, right? But I think to me, it's a key and critical part to the detailing process. You're not going to always have a bucket and a foam cannon or a hose or whatever. So it's a very necessary thing. I just think it's got a steeper learning curve than typically washing a car, right?
Okay. And so I'm much more of a believer of soap. I prefer to use soap in general, the suds. I feel it's slicker. But speaking of slickness, if you could make your best rinseless versus your best car soap, is there one that is more lubricated? Which one is the most lubricated?
I would say the soap simply because of concentration, right? When you are diluting a rinseless wash, you are very high concentration of water in those scenarios. So that's why I said the towel's so important. And something like a soap, you have an abundant amount of surfactants on the surface. You have the added lubrication of water being inherently part of that process too. There's just a lot more of everything. But yes, I think I would say a soap is more lubricating than a rinseless.
Okay.
Maybe comments will roast me on that.
Yeah, maybe. But for me, I don't care what anyone says. Well, I like the technical answers, but I can just feel it. It just feels different. So I'll leave it at that. Anyway, we're giving you guys value, so you get the information and you do whatever you want with it. And
Right.
next, let's talk about interior cleaners or other types of cleaners. When, let's say, for example, when you formulate a leather cleaner, do you rely on the raw ingredients data, or do you consult with OEMs? How, like, do you make sure that the products is safe for the interior of the car?
So some of all of it, right? So when we work with raw material manufacturers, they'll explain to us, hey, this is a naturally derived ingredient based off of, some sort of sugar derived surfactant or some sort of, plant derived ingredient. So we know it's safe. There's obviously like plenty of consideration around things like pH. You can't have a high pH or a low pH on something like that. We reach into some kind of interesting things like how some museum curator would restore a old leather artifact and how do they rehydrate it, how do they clean it. Inclusion of things like silicones will create like things called spew. And we get really nerdy into, you've seen products like micellar, like waters and things like that. Those are very strongly encapsulating surfactants, very gentle surfactants. Um, and so those sorts of ingredients come in there. You can't use things like caustic potassium hydroxide or things like sodium metasilicate, things that are going to be very harsh to surfaces, obviously, on the interior. So that's why can't I just take my wheel and tire cleaner and go do my interior with it? I'm like, there's ingredients in the wheel and tire cleaner that don't really belong on those more delicate surfaces, obviously.
Okay. And the other day, I heard a brand on a podcast, not from the House of Rag podcast for the viewers, but a long time ago, I heard someone from a brand that mentioned that you can pretty much put anything that you want on the SDS, meaning that the pH that is there might not be the real pH. Is there any truth to this?
There is, unfortunately. It's something I experienced a lot is, why is your product corrosive for transport, but theirs isn't? I'm like, theirs should be corrosive for transport too, or theirs should be flammable and they can't ship it via air. Um, there's really no strong regulation in the car care space, which is part of why it's a little wild west, like we talked about on the previous video. I think that's changing over time. There's more and more kind of brands getting busted or having their hands slapped by regulators for not doing things properly. Usually they'll get caught with like a disaster, right? Something like they're
Hmm.
shipping uh, their wheel acid and something happens on a UPS truck and it heavily damages the truck or God forbid hurts a person. Then they go back to them and say, hey, we reviewed the SDS for that thing that spilled in our truck. And according to your SDS, it shouldn't have done anything. And it actually was incredibly corrosive. And then usually you'll have IATA or the FAA or somebody get involved in the case of something happening with an airline, right? Because you're shipping sometimes these goods and you're flying to Florida with your family, and underneath in the cargo bay of the plane is somebody's product that's on a pallet shipping that direction too. So you can Google, like, there's been accidents where product has exploded in the bottom of planes and damaged planes or potentially had to make planes land and stuff like that. And company X got sued for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for causing that. But there's really it's an honor system, right? Like I can make a pH 14 product and put on the SDS. It's a pH 12, and so it's
Mm.
not corrosive for transport. Or you see a lot of people put on SDS as like proprietary. And I'm like, it's fine to put proprietary in section 3 for the ingredient name, but not for the classification. As a consumer, you deserve to know if there's a corrosive ingredient that's capable of damaging your eyes or damaging your skin, and it's not okay for the company to protect their intellectual property by hiding an ingredient because they don't want you to know what that ingredient is. They can say proprietary ingredient and it's a corrosive proprietary ingredient that's damaging the skin and eyes. I'm like, that's acceptable. Um, but you see too much of like just the whole line item in section 3 saying proprietary, cast number proprietary, percentage in the blend proprietary, classification for hazards proprietary. I'm like, you can't do that. And more often regulations are coming out like California right to know, which should be in section 15 on SDSs, and it should be available on websites within 2 clicks of the product page. Is the ingredients that are in the blend hazardous and non-hazardous? So that means you'll look at an SDS like atoms, for instance. I'll just use them as an example because I can. But section 3 will have the hazardous ingredients in the SDS. Section 15 will have the hazardous and non-hazardous ingredients. So it'll say water, silicone, yada yada, all the way down, and it's in descending order of concentration, meaning essentially everything that's in the blend. It's just the ones that are dangerous for you are in section 3. But sometimes people look at section 3 and think that's the ingredients disclosure section. I'm like, it's not. That's only the hazardous ingredients, and it's to tell you what parts of the formulation are hazardous and where's it coming from. So it'll say like, sodium hydroxide, class 1A, corrosive to eyes and skin. So, then you're like, okay, well, that's bad. And if it's at a high enough concentration in section 14, which is the transport, it'll say, UA 1428 corrosive for transport because it damages skin and metal. And that's what the purpose of an SDS is. I see too often people going line by line on an SDS thinking it's a formulary disclosure sheet, and they're like, this company has this ingredient in, this one doesn't, and this one's not listing this, but they should. And I'm like, it's not really what those are for. They're for safety. They're for you as a consumer to read it and go, should I be having eye protection or glove protection in this scenario? But too often it turns into a formulary shootout between brands, and I'm like, it's getting a little distorted.
There's a I've seen another comment the other day that someone could read the SDS and tell if it was white label or like a real unique IP.
Right.
That's
Um,
complete.
there's so like at B&B, we use ChemDocs, right? So they're a German-based company that assists companies in creating SDSs. So there might be lots of different companies using ChemDocs. So when you see an SDS that's structured similarly, they're like, it's the same manufacturer. I'm like, not necessarily. That's not necessarily true. Um, what I think has been more interesting is sometimes you can tell where something's manufactured because there'll be a mistake where somebody's brand is on the sheet, but then they have in the who's responsible for the SDS, they'll have the manufacturing company. So you'll have two different brands and it'll say the same manufacturing company. And so then people are like, oh, they both get it from X or Y, which, you know, I've said on PAM, the organizers show, as well as other places, just because two people buy from B&B or two people buy from some other manufacturer doesn't mean they're getting the same formula.
Hmm. Okay, that's very revealing. Thank you so much. And the other day, I came across another product that was a dilutable interior APC, and I looked up the SDS, and I've seen the ingredient called EGME. So I'm not gonna try to say it in its full length. I'll put it on the screen here. But this ingredient is usually seen in wheel cleaners or heavy degreasers. First, I want to know if this is a solvent because I've heard you mention it the other day. And would you say that is safe to use in the interior of the car?
Yeah, so I'm used to hearing it, you know, abbreviated as EB. You've maybe heard me say glycol ether EB. That's essentially the same thing what you're saying here. It's ethylene glycol monobutyl ether.
Yeah.
There's also DB, which is a more gentle version of EB. They have different VOC regulations. So EB is a VOC, a volatile organic compound, whereas DB is a exempt or a low vapor pressure VOC, so it doesn't count against VOCs. Typically, what you'll see is the market's moving towards DB. It doesn't clean as well as EB, but it's not as harsh. These are, in fact, solvents, or what they're frequently used as is co-solvents, meaning they participate alongside other ingredients in the blend, and they're not necessarily like the active ingredient, but they're useful for helping things be stable in solution, helping emulsify things in solution, acting as like kind of a general purpose solvent in order to solubilize things. So in a wheel and tire cleaner, having the right ether in your product will allow the tire to get clean faster. So it'll make the tire, the brown come off of it a lot more aggressively if you have a lot of EB, DB, or something like glycol ether, PNB. Um, in terms of it being in an interior product, I don't think it's necessarily a big issue. If I was formulating it, I'd probably reach for something like DB that's a little bit less intense. Having too much of it in your formulation could damage surfaces or dry out plastics and things unnecessarily harshly. The fact that it was a dilutable APC probably helps with that, right? Because you're cutting down the concentration considerably. But sometimes manufacturers will have just a little bit in the formula just because it helps it be freeze thaw stable or it helps it be more shelf stable. Much like adding a dash of glycerin or um, a dimethicone or something to a blend will help it just be more shelf stable. So it's not necessarily, I would call it an inactive ingredient, not necessarily an active ingredient. But I don't think there's anything necessarily unintentionally harsh about EB or DB. I just would say there's lots of options. There's a lot of butyl ethers that you can reach for, and they have different qualities.
Okay. But I think I saw like 20%. So that again, that was a dilutable product, but I
Yeah, so
saw
they're
20%.
probably using it in a lot of ways to help with cleaning because it's very inexpensive. So if
Okay.
you include that into a blend, it'll kind of munch through films and dirt and help the product penetrate a lot more quickly. So then you're going to see a lot more thorough clean. I would just say then the downside to that is if you leave some on the seat or the surface too long, you could sort of discolor the surface or stain it.
Okay, so you should rinse it with
Yeah,
a
yeah,
wet
or
towel, for example.
come back with a wet towel. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, 10 to 30%. All right. So, what are your thoughts on diluting chemicals with distilled water? I've rarely done it, but I've never noticed any issue there. There seems to be people that put emphasis on using distilled water.
Yeah, I've seen a lot on labels of use potable water, meaning water that you would be willing to drink or capable of drinking as a minimum for what to dilute with. Obviously, using low quality water can absolutely wreck a product's shelf life or shelf stability, or even screw up its performance. The reason for that is water is going to have a lot of dissolved salts and dissolved minerals and things in it. It's going to vary wildly in pH. Some municipalities are adding different additives to waters in order to make it safe for consumption, or uh, maybe they're trying to clean something out of the water before it makes it to the consumer. So tap water is not tap water universally. Whereas when you
Mhm.
go to something like deionized or distilled water, or RO water, which is reverse osmosis, you're using purified water essentially. And so that relieves the system of a variable. So if you're using something like distilled water, you're using water that has had a lot of those salts and a lot of those minerals removed. If you're using DI water, you're using deionized water, which means a lot of the ionicity in the blend, the positive and negative charges coming from various ingredients, has been removed with a resin bed. And that's going to help the product because it's not adding a variable that can screw it up. Sometimes as formulators, we have the wherewithal and the conscientiousness of building into the formulations like a small amount of chelate. Even if we don't need it for performance, we use it for stability, right? We'll also overly preserve a formula with an in-can preservative, knowing that somebody like a rinseless wash is going to dilute it and then leave it in a bottle sitting there. So you have to over preserve it because you're going to need that preserve to be functional enough in the diluted state to continue to keep it clean. And sometimes just not enough. So once the formula has a pH or a salts issue, you might see discoloration. You might start having it sour, as we call it, and it'll literally smell sour. It'll smell like the fragrance is changing, and it's because it is. You're getting basically side reactions in your distilled or your diluted bottle that are causing it to lose its shelf stability. So maybe the system separates, maybe something precipitates or settles out, maybe it starts to go cloudy, um, or like I said, things like color and fragrance start to shift or alter, and you're like, oh, it started off a really nice pink and now it looks like kind of brown and it smells bad. And it's like, there's probably either not enough preservative or not enough other secondary ingredients in there to make it shelf stable at that level of dilution. So in those instances, I would just encourage dumping it out and starting fresh. Um, and I would give that feedback back to the brand or the manufacturer saying like, hey, it didn't sit stable. But some of it too is we can build in preservative, but if we build in too much preservative, it can actually be damaging to your skin or eyes or an irritant. So we build in the appropriate amount for you to dilute it. But if you're putting it in a very disgusting bottle or a very unclean situation, the preservative can be overwhelmed. And even though it was preserved, you basically overwhelmed it and now it's acting like it's not preserved. And people go, ew, this thing wasn't like stable. And I'm like, maybe you need to consider something about the way you were handling it. People putting their fingers in the blend, maybe they didn't wash their hands very well. They're introducing like E. coli or something to the blend, and then it turns all smelly and changes colors, and they're like, ugh, this product doesn't sit stable. I'm like, could be you, sir.
Yeah, the rinseless washers, especially, I don't know, after maybe a few days in an IK sprayer, for example, a pump sprayer, that would change the scent. So you recommend to dump that away. And we've seen people like they dilute like an APC in a really large container with tap water. So I understand there's tap water is not created equal. Some people live in the country where they have well water.
Right.
So let's say I live in a city with pretty much good water in terms to be drinkable. Can I? Would you recommend that I can dilute my APC in a really large container and use it for example, for a few months, 6 months?
As long as you're conscientious of the fact that you're doing it in a clean container, and you're not just like, hey, I depleted at 80%, now I'm going to refill it with fresh concentrate and fresh water, and you just kind of keep topping it up. Like, occasionally you should empty that and clean it out really well before you start over with another, like, aliquot or batch. Um, but understand that when you're using tap water, you're introducing a risk, right? So if there's organics in your tap water, they're going to find different ingredients like phosphates and stuff in an APC, and you might see these ghostly, wispy kind of structures showing up inside of your APC, and you're like, "What the hell is that?" And it's the chemistry interacting together, or you're like, "Why am I getting a white precipitate in the bottom corner of this vessel?" And it's because you're getting side reactions from things reacting out of your water with your APC's ingredients. So doing things like deionized water, RO water, whatever, purified water will help reduce, if not completely eliminate, goofy things like that.
Okay. I guess you should try it out for anyone at home. Because I've usually bought a 5 liter APC
Mhm.
and did it 1 to 10 in many different separate clean gallon, and I've used them for a very long time. Maybe I've never noticed any problem, but yeah.
Yeah, I think in something like a system that has an acidic or an alkaline pH, there's a lot less likelihood of things going wrong than if it's pH neutral, like a rinseless wash. Because when they're at pH neutral, that gives the opportunity for microbes and things to grow, and they have nice, yummy surfactants and things to munch on, and they'll grow. And as they grow, they'll off gas, they'll put methane and stuff into your product depending on the type of bacteria, and it just jacks the whole thing up. Whereas if it's an alkaline formula or an acidic formula, you won't have chances for things to grow in it because it's not hospitable for growth.
So these days we hear all the time that APC can damage your interior surface. Is it something that brands say to gear you towards their dedicated interior product? Is there any truth that like a real good formulated APC can damage interior surfaces when it's used with common sense, meaning that you didn't let it drip, you use it on a cool plastic panel, maybe you wiped it off at the end with a damp towel? Because I've never had any problem. I've used APCs from 3D, from Chemist, for example, for years and years. I've cleaned interiors with that specifically. I've never damaged an interior product. And nowadays, I hear all the brands claiming that APC damage interiors. What's your take on this?
It depends on if you're following the manufacturer or the brand's, specifications on dilution. I would say you're very low likelihood, if not nearly impossible, to damage an interior with an interior cleaner. Whereas it is possible with an APC, but it depends on the surface, right? You're going to have, just like with wheels, you're like, well, some wheels are clear coated, some are an anodized aluminum coating. So some chemistry hurts one and not the other. It's the same thing. Bringing an APC into the interior, usually I recommend almost diluting it twice as much as something like an interior cleaner. So if like the interior cleaners like dilute 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, and then you want to use a wheel and tire cleaner or some sort of APC instead, I would use something like 1 to 10 or even 1 to 20 dilution of that in order just to buffer your chance from causing damage, because there is things in exterior products that are going to be stronger, more harsh, because they have to be to clean an exterior than in an interior. But is every APC going to damage dash plastics and stuff? No. But could APCs damage a leather surface? Absolutely. Could APCs damage suede and things like that? Absolutely. So it's very surface dependent, and it's very probably formulary dependent as well. But
Mhm.
if you're ever in doubt, I would just dilute the APC a lot stronger than you would expect, because they're designed to be capable of diluting very heavily without you just nuking the performance. So don't be afraid to dilute it.
Yeah, because before when I started detailing, that's all people talked about. It's called an APC, right? All-purpose cleaner. So we took it for what it's worth. But I guess sometimes you can damage something and not notice it. Maybe the car leaves or maybe there's a repetition thing, right? So I would not
Right.
personally maintain my car with an APC weekly, but if you a car comes to me and that's haven't been cleaned in 2 years, well, I'll probably need an APC to degrease all that crap, you know.
Yeah,
And
no doubt.
that's in this instance, I've never seen a problem.
And like you said, APC stands for all-purpose cleaner. So the purpose is you should be able to use it interior and exterior, whereas an interior is named an interior cleaner and not APC because it's intentionally gentle. So if you used it to wash your wheels, you'd be like, this stuff's kind of wimpy. Um, I just I think some of it too is like it's like you said, it's an overtime thing. When you're using an APC on your interior dashes and stuff, you might not notice any difference that day, but repeated usage of that over time could damage the plastic by drying it out more than intended. And maybe over time, it's going to be more likely to get brittle and crack, especially from like things like sun damage, because you're stripping all of the oils and things that are built into the plastic formulation. And so you're kind of drying it out and making it softer, or you're actually making it more chance for brittleness from flexes in the plastic, temperature fluctuations, sun damage, all those sorts of things. So while you're not necessarily noticing it on day of, it'd be interesting to do. I'm going to clean this dash with an APC every day for a year versus I'm going to clean this dash, other side of the dash with an interior cleaner every day for a year and see if one actually fades out more than the other over that year.
Hmm. Good, yeah, good point.
Chance for
The-
content.
yeah. So to get back into the interior cleaners, so we've seen a lot of them are popular when they foam, right? They're oftentimes used in a small pump or a trigger sprayer that foams.
Yep.
So do these products produce? Do they put the foaming feature on purpose? Because I've seen one product that is really popular in the interior that foams, like I said, with a pump sprayer, but they mentioned to use a defoamer in carpets. So why would that produce foam in the first place if you don't want foam in your carpets?
Because people want to use these things on lots of surfaces. So something like in a non absorbent surface like a leather, you want to see that lather and that foaming. On plastics, you want to see that lather and foaming. But then when you go to do a floor mat or something like the carpets or a fabric seat, the foaming becomes a downside. It becomes frustrating if it's too foamy. You just keep rubbing it with your towel and you're like, more foam, more foam, more foam. Like you don't want it to be foamy. So um, again, when you're trying to make something a jack of all trades or suitable to a lot of different surfaces, sometimes you really don't want it to behave the same way on different surfaces. So maybe you have to introduce something like an anti-foam. I haven't personally seen that where you need like an accompanying product. We just usually use certain surfactants in the product that will lather upon agitation, but in something like a fabric surface, the foam is what they call friable, which means it's kind of very dry, and it's by being a dry foam, it pops very readily, so the foam doesn't really stick around. So while you're using a drill or something like a brush attachment on a drill for like cleaning a fabric surface, you'll see the foam production. But basically, as soon as you're done agitating the surface, the foam's practically disappearing before you can even get after it with a towel. That's formulaically on purpose. We want it to be a very non-persistent foam. So
Okay.
I would say use something like that that has that conscientious built into it rather than having to reach for another product that's basically like use this to counteract a feature in the product, like
Hmm.
building in an anti-foam into a
Yeah,
product. Because there's
because I
surfactants that won't keep a very strong bubble. And then there's surfactants that will keep a very, very wet, strong bubble.
because I've noticed that problem when I use a hot water extractor in the carpets. If I have an APC or a carpet cleaner that makes foam, because with the psi of the jet and maybe the suction, that would like encourage the foaming ability of that product. So that's
Okay.
really something I try to avoid, and that's why I use Adams. Actually, I use Adams upholstery and carpet cleaner because it doesn't foam.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
really like
And that's
that.
on purpose. Adam, when we first created that, he kept coming after us about this foam's too much, this foam's too much. And that was something I had to learn as a formulator. I'm like, why wouldn't you want the foam? It's a cleaner. And he's like, come clean this floor mat and tell me this isn't frustrating.
But you put the foam on purpose. Is it something separate from the cleaning aspect of the product that you make?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can make this. Okay.
So there's surfactants that are low foaming on purpose. So those are things that you literally build into washing detergent, dishwasher detergent, because you're like, I need cleaning, but I do not want a mountain of foam coming out of my washing machine or my dishwasher. So you can use those same chemistries in car care to be like, okay, if you rub it really aggressively, you're going to see foam, but basically as soon as you stop rubbing it aggressively, the bubbles are gone.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. I have a few rapid fire style question.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So why ceramic coating don't resist bird poo and water spots? Why do they etch through the coating?
Because the coating is incredibly thin. So like when we call them nano coatings or they're nanometers in thickness, it's just there's just not enough there. Essentially what you're trying to do with a coating is offer protection, anti-marring and scratch, but the film that's left behind because of the process of wiping it on, letting it flash and wiping it off, you're just not leaving a very appreciable film behind. If you took something like a ceramic coating and you basically airbrushed it onto a surface like how we do with clear coat, and you had several mils of thickness of that, I think you would see a lot more of that resistance to bird poo and water spot etching and stuff. But it's because the coating is so thin, that's your downside, is it's going to be struggle to hold up against that type of stuff.
Okay. So it's funny to me because I don't want to talk bad about coatings because I love ceramic coatings, but people say all the time it's protecting your paint, right? You add protection, you add a layer of protection, but over the years I've noticed that it doesn't protect against the sun, it doesn't protect against the bird poo or the water spots. So what does it protect from other than self-cleaning abilities or ease of maintenance? Does it protect at all?
It should. Absolutely it should. I think some of the issue is not all ceramic coatings are legitimate ceramic coatings. Um, I've talked about on other podcasts and things like it's a silazane technology that makes it a ceramic coating. When you're playing with something that's just an amino functional silicone or something, that's not going to be a ceramic coating. So there's just a lot of kind of flim flam products out there that aren't quite as legitimate, and so they screw the whole space up.
Okay.
But realistically, if you took a layer of ceramic and you put it on the surface, you should be able to drip acid directly onto that and then wait a day or two and wipe it right back off. Like it should not etch.
Okay. So there's still protection in there.
Yep.
And in your opinion, does slickness matter afterwards? What the paint feel when the ceramic coating is applied?
100%. A lot of, coatings boast 9H hardness, 10H hardness. Those are basically pencil hardnesses. How likely can you damage it with specific types of graphite? A factor to making the surface less capable of scratching is slickness. Um, it's like blunting something, like taking a hit and blocking it versus taking a hit and deflecting it. When something's slick, you can't really get an edge to grab and dig into the surface. So slick surfaces are harder to defect than non-slick surfaces. So it's a
Okay.
pretty important aspect.
That's kind of a weird question, but the ceramic coating is slick after the application, but over time, is there ceramic coatings that stay slicker than others? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, I think we talked about on the last call different sort of functional groups on the polymer backbone that are maybe available to be reacted with versus not, if all the reactive sites are basically tied up. Um, Over time, just like a clear coat, things are going to sit on the surface, things are going to make films and residues, things are going to actually try and bond to the ceramic coating and things, just like how the ceramic coating bonds to your paint. Things can bond to your ceramic, and that'll rob it of slickness, that'll rob it of its hydrophobic performance. So there's a lot of work as formulators to develop better and better cleaning technologies for the coatings without removing the coatings, just using straight up acid or base, right? Because we want to clean the coating off, but we don't want to strip the coating off. The problem is a lot of things that are on those coatings are pretty harsh to try and remove, or very difficult to remove without reaching for more harsh chemistry. So there's just a lot of work being done there.
Okay. And the question came again. I know we touched on it last time, but briefly, you want to answer that question. Does high solids in a ceramic coating equals to more durability?
No. So high solids will increase longevity of the durability, if that makes sense. So high solids will give you more of the same durable protection for longer. But the durable protection or the durability comes from the ingredients themselves and what the film coating is comprised of. So having more of a very not durable material will not make it more durable. It will make it last longer, but it won't be more durable. Using a more
Okay.
durable material will make it more durable, and then using more of that more durable material will make it have higher longevity. So to me, it's very important to understand the distinction between longevity versus durability. Durability is like how hard is it to remove. Longevity is how long does it take to remove how hard it is to remove, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. So what I'm
So
after is more durability.
yeah, so durability, that's the quality of the coating. So you can have a less active coating that has a higher durability than something that has a lot of activity, but it's of a non-durable material, right? So you're like,
Okay.
this is a high solids coating, and people are like, sick, this is going to last forever. I'm like, no, because the durability is so low of that film. Whereas something else is like, this is a low actives coating. And they're like, why is it outlasting the high solids coating? I'm like, because the durability of that material is very high. So
So
the
again,
best thing you can do is have a high actives, high durability material. Then you have a very strong film build of a very durable material, and you get a very high longevity from that.
okay, kind of another dumb question. If I witness high durability, do I get the longevity with it? If it's durable,
Depends.
it's long.
They typically go hand in hand. A more durable product should have higher longevity in there inherently. But if you're going to
Okay.
have a low actives, high durable product, it may not outlast a high actives, low durable product, if that makes sense. Or did I
Okay.
say it the same way twice? I'm just basically saying if you, so going back to my paper analogy I've used on a few instances, if you have 3 sheets of paper versus 30 sheets of paper, you're going to say they have the same durability, but the 30 sheets of paper has higher longevity because as you're wearing it away, you have a lot more to wear away. But if you're going to have a block of steel and a ream of paper, that block of steel should last longer, even though it's not as thick because it's very
Hmm.
high durability, right? So
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. And there's certainly instances where maybe things have nearly the same durability, but the one that's higher actives technically has a little bit less durability, but there's just a lot more of it. So it technically outlasts the other product that is more durable. There's just not enough of it. So, like
Hmm.
I said, the holy grail there is have a very durable material that you have a very high concentration of, and that's going to give you the most like paramount protection.
Yeah. And in your words, is what's the difference, the real world difference between a sealant and a ceramic coating?
To me, a ceramic coating as a formulator is reaching for a certain subset of chemistry, primarily polysiloxanes or siloxanes, as some people call them. In sealants, you're largely calling it that because it's primarily based on silicone technology and mostly amino functional silicone technologies or polymer based technologies, which polymer based technologies is usually still based on silicones. So to me, you have one ingredient that's a resin that cures hard and glass like, and then the other one you have is a water hydrophobic type material, but it's got basically a static cling to the surface. So the sealant is going to give you that water beading and stuff because it's a silicone based technology, but it doesn't covalently bond to the surface. So it's not going to be as permanent. A siloxane also is very hydrophobic, but it's making a physical bond with the surface and it's curing. So it's inherently harder to remove. So that was kind of the stepwise functional growth in the technologies was going from wiggly spaghetti that wants to stay on the surface pretty well versus to actually making a physical bond with the surface and giving it a hard shell.
But do
That's
you
why
think,
ceramics are important.
would you say that a sealant, even though it's not as as durable and it does not bond as the same way? Does it do anything else than beating water and adding gloss? Does it protect at all?
It's a sacrificial protectant for sure.
Okay.
So they'll often also have waxes accompanying them. So their sealants are literally designed to be a sacrificial protectant, just like a ceramic is. It's just not as it's not as durable, and so it doesn't have as high of longevity. But it's a perfectly legitimate technology. I would say sealants are still important because of their ease of use, their expedience to apply. Usually you can apply them onto a less like perfect surface than you should with a ceramic coating, but also your commitment for that longevity isn't as high. So if you want to touch the vehicle more often, if you want to bounce between brands or bounce between products or whatever, a sealant, you're not making as big of a commitment as you are with a ceramic coating. Because as many people know that have used ceramic coatings, once a vehicle's ceramic coated, it behaves considerably different than it did before with or without things like sealants and stuff. It just has a different feel. Products behave differently on it. Um, and it kind of locks you out of using some technologies because they literally won't bond anymore. Like you can't use really a wax on top of a ceramic and get any meaningful longevity out of that anymore. So I've called it in the past new school versus old school. I'm like, you kind of want to make a choice when you're applying protection to your vehicles. Are you using waxes and sealants and kind of old school technologies? Or are you using silicates, SiO2 stuff and ceramics? I'm like, but they have different feels. They create different finishes. Um, you've seen people say like with waxes and sealants, the car has like a wet gloss and it feels very like uh almost like jelly, not like wiggly jelly, but like it has like you could almost sink your fingernails into it, and it has a very warm glow. And then when you talk about ceramics, it's a lot more of a cold appearance, a mirror-like appearance, a very hard appearance. And it doesn't feel like you can like you don't have a substantive layer like you can sink your fingernails into it. It feels like it's very petrified or hard.
Good. Last question, Chris. So I'm always concerned about the product that I use on top of my ceramic coating because in my wash process, I like to use a quick detailer just to knock off the water drips or add gloss or again add slickness to the paint. Do you think there's any detriment to do that? And is there a possibility to change the performance of the coating while using those?
100%. um I think if you're going to align yourself with a specific coating, you should probably use the specific drying aid or sealant or whatever that comes from the brand to protect or rejuvenate or reinforce that, simply because they should be doing their due diligence to make sure that they're not robbing it of its performance. But if you use a coating from brand A and a sealant from brand B, you can 100% just basically be fighting yourself, and you create this really hydrophobic surface and then you cover it up with this subpar hydrophobic sealant, and you're essentially robbing yourself of a lot of the benefits of the coating because you're not getting the self cleaning you should, you're not getting the slickness you should, you're not getting um, the lack of adherence of contaminants to the surface like you should. So I'm one of the types of people, I don't prefer to top my ceramic coatings with a lot of different things. I typically want to apply the ceramic and then let the ceramic do its job. And I use things to keep the surface clean and decontaminated more than I do to just keep layering on, sauces, so to speak. Just because I don't like the coating should be your paramount amount of protection, right? Should be your heightened amount of hydrophobics, your highest amount of like de inability to collect contaminants. So why would you want to cover that up with something?
But we've been told to use a lubricant for the drying process. What's your thought on this?
Literally just the typical detail spray should do you just fine. So to me, I like detail spray because it's a silicone emulsion and water, no more complicated than that. It doesn't leave any durable protectants behind, but it also doesn't have any chance for leaving water spots or changing the hydrophobics or streaking or residues or anything like that. I'm like, that's why the detail sprays exist, is they should be your drying aid and your lubricant.
Okay. Well, Chris, that was great. Very immense amount of value for me and for sure for the audience. Want to thank you again for coming here. Any final thoughts before we leave?
No, I'd like to keep doing this if we're able to, and keep the good comments coming in the comment section. I check back periodically, and I'm happy to continue the discussion there. If you disagree with anything I said, or you don't like what I said, say something about it in the comments. I'm not perfect or infallible, so if I said something incorrect or wrong, like, call me out on it. But I like engaging with the community and the audience, so please feel free to ask additional questions or follow-up questions in the comments, and maybe Frank, if you'll have me, I'll keep doing this.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have you again. So, guys, leave your comment, your question down below, and we'll take a look at it. And Chris, thank you so much again. I'll see you soon, my friend.
Thank you, appreciate it.